Thank you all for joining us today for the Ask Me Anything and Meet the Architect Azure Data Factory. Before we start, I have a few quick things to go over. If you haven't already, please check in using our event check-in at aka.ms/reactor-check-in with event ID 13382. I have shared that link in the chat and we'll share it again. By checking in today, you will receive links to the content that go along with today's session. Please ask questions using the live chat feature. You should see two text box icon with a question mark over the top of one of the text boxes. That is the live event Q&A. In that chat, I will also be sharing some links to the Reactor Meetup page and monthly newsletter if you're interested in checking out what other sessions we have. Today's session will be added to our Reactor YouTube channel in 24 to 48 hours. I will share a link to that. And then finally, near the end, I will share a link to our Reactor survey. If you have a few minutes, we would greatly appreciate your feedback. I will now pass it over to our presenters for today's event.
Hey, thank you, Dion. First of all, we just want to thank everyone for attending the Ask Me Anything for Azure Data Factory. And today, right, besides just architects, we brought almost the entire team of PMs. And during this call, we also have some of the engineering managers on the Azure Data Factory team that will be here to answer any questions that might be top of your mind. And so before we get into the specifics of it, I just want to go one round and first getting everyone on the team to introduce themselves before we kick off with some of the latest updates for Azure Data Factory, and then we'll move into the Ask Me Anything. So maybe to kick off, let's start with Abhishek.
Thanks, Hyong. So hello, everyone. I'm Abhishek, and I work as a program manager in the Data Factory team. I focus on CI/CD, security, and code-based transformations in ADF.
Thank you, Abhishek. And Charlie? Charlie, you're muted.
Hi, yeah. Hi, I'm Charlie, and I'm a PM on Azure Data Factory team, and I run the orchestration piece of Azure Data Factory. That includes all the control flows and everything in your pipelines that deal with logic and stuff. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. And then we have Mark.
Hey everybody, thanks for joining. This is Mark. I'm a program manager on the Azure Data Factory team. My areas of focus are data transformation and our Synapse integration. Yeah, so great to meet everybody and hope to be able to answer your questions.
Yep, and then we have Sunil as well.
Hello everybody, I'm Sunil Sabad. I'm also program manager on the Azure Data Factory team. I'm mostly responsible for customer success, supportability, and end-to-end scenarios, etc. Okay, would love to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, and then today, originally we will have Pankaj Nayak to join us as well. He's the architect on the Azure Data Factory team, and today he just has an emergency. That's why he cannot make it. And so with that, without further ado, right, let's go into some of the updates about Azure Data Factory. We picked and highlights of some of the specific updates that is, just went live within the last 1-2 weeks. And then I'll invite PMs on the team to share with you some of this, right? Now, the first one would be Abhishek, which is going to talk about the new Azure Data Factory homepage.
Yeah, we have a very exciting and refreshing new homepage now in Azure Data Factory. So remember, when you log in through Azure Portal into the Data Factory, you will be landed into this homepage, which basically gives you a very quick start into your data integration project. You can find some of the key functionalities like ingestion, orchestration, transforming the data. You have those beautiful icons and you can get started with the job right on day one. And then you have additional discover sections, so you can actually browse for partners. So this is also one of the key things that we are doing is kind of curating a list of partners who can really help you with your data integration project, fast track your data integration projects as well. And so you can actually figure out those partners, and we'll keep updating those list of partners over time. And then you can find all your recent resources, so things that you've been working on to be more productive. You will see all those options populated in the recent resources. So if you want to access your pipeline, which you were working on yesterday, you will find it right there. And we have some features showcases as well. All the upcoming, the greatest features, integration endpoints from Data Factory, you can find it in the features showcases. That's all.
Hey, thank you, Abhishek. And then the next slide before I get into the Ask Me Anything would be some of the recent product updates. And with that, I'll invite Mark to share about it.
Yeah, so a couple of new announcements, and if you're wondering where these announcements usually land, if you're looking for getting the latest updates, in terms of Data Factory features, there's a couple of good places. We have there's the Microsoft Tech blog, and all the PMs on the team write to the Tech blog, and there's an ADF, Azure Data Factory section just for announcements and for blogs there. And anytime we release a new feature, we put information on there. There's also in product release notes with the bell icon or the icon at the top right that'll show you the latest announcements for Data Factory and release notes. And then the third would be our Twitter feed. So look up Azure Data Factory on Twitter, and you can see our announcements come in through there as well. We wanted to highlight that just sort of landed really recently, support for always encrypted when using copy activity with SQL. We're also adding this into data flows, and that should land in a few weeks as well. The Data Factory pipeline send notifications on Microsoft Teams channel is a really great blog that Abhishek put together, and there's a link to that, so you can learn how to set up Teams for notifications from your factory inside of that blog. And then last but not least is the Power Query activity, which is one that we've been expanding quite rapidly this year in terms of adding more transformations into Power Query. And that Power Query gives that citizen integrator access into the power of Data Factory and transforming data at scale. So some very exciting product updates I wanted to share with you before we jump in. Okay, back to you, Hyong.
Hey, thank you, Mark. So I think we're going to move into the Ask Me Anything, and like prior to the this Ask Me Anything, right? We've reached out to the community, and many of you, thank you for sharing some of your feedback as well as some of the questions that you might have. And so I think the first question is really on dynamic expression for integration runtime. So I think with that, I'll lean that to Abhishek to answer the question. And the question is really from 5G. Do you plan to have dynamic expression for integration runtime? And in this case, we have use cases where we have the same set of data sources, but on different geographical sites. And we have to duplicate the pipeline per IR, since this could not be dynamic to have any if based on some metadata. Abhishek.
Yeah, that's a great question. We do hear this from other customers as well, and right now this isn't possible. But unfortunately, we will take this feedback, and we would soon. We've been working this out for some time. We don't have a ETA around this part, but that's a very valid feedback. And just for everyone else's awareness, the question around here is kind of how to build a truly metadata-based pipeline where you can parameterize integration runtimes and all the references that a particular pipeline has. And so this is something which we are actively looking at. We don't have an ETA, but this is something which we are tracking.
Got it. Thank you, Abhishek. Now, the next question is really on nested loops. And this question is really for Charlie. And here it says nested loops are not allowed in Data Factory. However, we have cases where this is preferred. Is there any reason technically why you cannot have a for loop inside another? If you could share some of the thinking, that would be good. Charlie, please.
Yeah. So again, this is a great question. Okay, so the reason we forbid a for loop within a for loop is we're worried about a fan out, and you will hit the concurrency limit quite soon. If you have, for instance, for each 10 times 10, you will have 100 pipeline runs, very likely 100 activity runs easily in your pipelines. So if you have any questions regarding where situations we will have a for loop within a for loop, please reach to us, and it's typically we'll look at it and find a way to re-architect around that. Okay.
Hey, thank you, Charlie. Now the next question is for Mark, and this is also a note from let me see the name, Rais. And the question is, data preview results scrolling in data flows are not easy when you have many columns. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that we want to improve, and we do have some ideas on what we're going to do on that. We'd like to sort of refresh that data preview experience. It's been the same experience since we launched data flows a few years ago, and so we're definitely looking at doing that. It's a little annoying. You have to move the columns over to the right. Some ways around that is you can reorder the columns and select or in a transformation so that the columns you're interested in show up first on the left-hand side. It's a terrible workaround, I know, but it's just kind of one of those tricks that I do when I'm working with wide rows and data flows. So feedback is well intentioned, and I can tell you right now that we already have work items for this, and I plan on over the next couple of months getting to the point where I can write some blogs about some of the things that we want to improve in the data preview experience. Now we're going to make that better. So keep an eye out on those blogs I mentioned earlier for that. You'll see some of that land.
Hey, thank you, Mark. And then the next question is really for Sunil. And the question is also from Royce as well. And the question goes on like this. Newly deployed ADF pipeline are not visible and not selected in the monitor after you trigger them, even if the pipeline selection is set to all. It's like the same as a select star from table in view when newly added columns are not visible. Sunil, maybe you want to get some of your thoughts.
Yeah, so I think this question is more towards how we monitor. Remember the monitoring process. It takes some time. We usually go back and look at your pipeline status, pipeline output. So there is a lag. Okay, and said that we're trying to make the observability and controllability of the pipeline run in more real time. But that's way things forward. Okay. Yeah. So okay. Yeah.
Got it. Hey, thank you, Sunil.
Yeah.
And then the next question is from Mark. Here it says space characters are not allowed in the data flow transformation task.
This is true, and I'm thinking the ask is to allow that. And yes, special character spaces and whatnot is a common request that we get for that. The reason they're not is just that the grammar for the data flow script is not supporting it right now, but it's something that we can add. To be honest with you, most of our customers, have ways to, to rename using that. I'm not saying that that's our long-term answer. We definitely want to make that better, but yes, I've heard this feedback before, and special character handling within namings of your data flow elements is definitely something that's on the roadmap.
Thank you, Mark. Now the next question is for Charlie, and this is really a question also by Reyes, right, on expansion of the switch activity, irritating collapse and expand behavior. Charlie, maybe you want to share some of your thoughts there.
I assume he's referring to that when in developing the switch activity, we'll continue to have to expand and the collapse one. Yeah, we're investigating that, and we're actually running some experiments to understand what is the better experience here. So look out for the blog post, and we're aware of that. And personally, it bugs me too. So we're on the same boat. Yeah. Cool.
Thank you, Charlie. Yeah, and then I think the next question is for you and Mark, and maybe Charlie can start first, and then Mark can go on. This is really on grouping of tasks. For example, in SSIS, you have this notion of an SSIS sequence container, and that will simplify the UI experience dramatically. If your ADF pipeline has many tasks, what are some of the thoughts around grouping, both for like the activities in the pipeline, but also thinking about how you manage complex data flow? So maybe Charlie start with the pipeline, and then Mark can go to data flow.
Yeah, I'll start with pipeline. There was a long thinking along the way of shared pipeline or pipelet that you can actually group a few items together and make them shareable across pipelines. So this is something we have been investigating, but again, this is early prototyping phase. We're trying to figure out how to make these container editable and still usable in each pipeline, and we'll have more findings as we go along the way. Mark, anything to add on the data flow side?
Yeah, the same thing on the data flow side, where we are sort of ostensibly calling them flowlets, and same kind of thing. I mean, create containers of your data flow logic, your blocks and your graph, and then reuse those as well. And that is committed work. That is work that is on the backlog, or on the iteration path that is being worked on now. So that's one where you should look for announcements on that coming up this calendar year. Definitely agree with those as needed elements in terms of building, really extensible and enterprise-ready pipelines. Fully agree.
Thank you. Thanks, Charlie. Thanks, Mark. Now, the next question is on disabling of tasks or activities. And so this is really for Charlie. Disabling of tasks, sometimes I just need to keep the task in my pipeline, but yet keep them from execution. And here I think by task, the thinking is around activities, right? And so Charlie, maybe you want to share your thoughts on, what have we been thinking along this space?
Yeah, so let me just rephrase what I hear and add some assumptions. My understanding is this is really for development, and where you're developing a pipeline, you want a standing activity that just passes success or failure as your choice and still keep developing the pipeline. So you don't have to develop the whole thing as a monster piece, and you can break it down to step by step. This is a task that we're taking on this calendar year, and we'll hope to get back to you earlier than that with more progress on this. What we're thinking is we'll have some kind of selection to say mark as success and mark as a failure. And you will have a standing activity to take a hold of the place, and you'll continue to developing your pipelines going forward. Yes, we're actively looking into that, and I think the timeline will be somewhere this calendar year. Thank you.
Thank you, Charlie. Hey, and the next question is from Mark. This comes from the chat window within the Teams Live. Is if we use debug mode, there's no option to cancel the pipelines in debug. Can we have a cancel button for debug mode?
So if you're debugging a pipeline, you can cancel that. That is cancelable. So if you're talking about data preview, the data preview does not have a cancel button. That is a work item, though. That is something that we have on the board to do this calendar year. But the pipeline itself, when you're debugging, can be canceled. It's just the data preview that cannot. And so I'm just repeating myself, but yeah, we do have that requirement, and that is something that we're working on.
Sounds good. Cool. Keep the questions coming in the chat window, and then we'll also go to some of the questions that's been asked as well. Right. So the next question is really for Charlie as well. When do you plan to remove a limit of 40 activity for a single ADF pipeline?
Okay, this is a question we get a lot. There is a limit. Let me start by this. Any system has an upper limit that we have to obey to keep every system safe. We're not actively looking to remove the 40 limit, as you can go beyond whatever you want. Like we do have a backend system, and that backend system does put a limit on us. That said, we're trying to raise the limit from 40 to something more. We're eyeing around the 50 or 60, and we're testing out a few prototypes and seeing how things are going. But we'll get more answers by the end of this calendar year to say where the new limits will from. Again, we're not looking to like a limitless pipeline. You can put however many activity. That's not the direction we go. But we do want to expand the limit to make the pipeline more versatile.
Got it. Thank you, Charlie. Now the next question is for Abhishek. Will it be possible to parameterize SHIR or any other link services, reference name properties, so we can work on this more dynamically? And this comes from Asan.
Yeah, that's a great question again. So we hear this for a truly metadata-driven pipeline. We need these, and we are tracking this actively at this point in time. And I would recommend reach out to us. We would certainly want to learn a little more. We get the importance of this particular feature ask, and just to make sure that once we start with something like a private preview or something, we are there. So please feel free to get in touch with any one of us, Hyong, or anyone on the team over here, and we'll help you out with those functionalities. So at this point in time, I can say we are actively tracking that functionality.
Hey, sounds good. Thanks, Abhishek. Now, the next question is for Sunil. Could you provide feedback about the possibility to improve ADF development work based on suggested lists of ideas?
So here is our way how we we collect ideas, right? Feedback, from several sources, and during our semester planning at Microsoft, right? We consolidate all the major ideas, and also we take customer input, and we look at also product trend, and we kind of give priority to them, and then take them into a development cycle. Okay, so that's the process we follow. Okay, any other ideas you have or anything you want to share with us? Would love to hear from you. Okay.
Hey, thank you, Sunil. Now, the next question is for Abhishek on local and global variables, right? And this comes from Asan as well. And here it is, currently there's no scope for variables in ADF. Everything is global, and variable updates in the loop container affect each iteration. Just want to get your thoughts on that.
Sure, that's a great feedback, San. So just like parameters, you would expect something similar for variables as well. So that's a feature that we have heard from other customers, and we will consider that for the future.
Sounds good. Thanks, Abhishek. And then the next one is a long one from Mark on data flow zooming problems. Small and medium-sized data flows are okay to be seen. However, if the logic becomes very complex, the number of source and sync dataset grows. It zooms out view of a data flow is very annoying. Much time spent to zoom in whenever opening such data flows. Just to get some of the thoughts that Mark has here.
Well, we had made some changes recently to the graph on data flows, really specifically to address this, so that when you open the data flow, it should open up in the default zoom level such that the ratio you're given will fit on a single screen. So your entire graph should fit on one screen. If you're saying that zoomed out view is annoying, that's because we have to have some way to show all of the edges on the node in a single view, and so you have to the size and the ratio just has to be such that they're visible. The vertices connecting the edges on the single screen. A typical way or a good way to work with that then when things are zoomed out is to use the search bar. There is a search button on the top right on the design surface that lets you search for this specific transformations or things that you're looking for. And when you do that, it'll zoom into that to that specific node on your graph. That's probably the best way to do it. And then of course you can zoom in and out then at that level, or once you've found a certain part of the graph that you want to focus on. So the last thing I want to say to that is that the other thing that I would go back to what we talked about earlier in terms of flowlets. One way that we feel like it's going to make very large data flows more manageable is also to containerize a section of that. So you'll be able to essentially lasso, let's say maybe 10 transformations, just to pick a number, and then shrink that down to one, and that becomes a quote unquote flowlet. And then you can work within a screen or a graph that's much more manageable. That's really the sort of that last mile in terms of us making the complex flows easier to manage on the screen. But just keep in mind that we definitely have this in our, and as top of mind topic is ways to make the graph more manageable when they get very large like that. So yeah, hopefully that helps you in terms of feedback, but I appreciate the comments.
Got it. Yeah, and I think we have like a few more questions, right, that came from the pre-event kind of asking everyone to submit the questions. But while we get to the last question that I have in the list, and hopefully everyone will keep the questions coming in the chat window. If everyone can maybe just put into the chat window, and thanks to Dion for publishing them, one feature that you want in ADF in 2021 and 2022, what would it be? It could be one feature that has already shipped. It could be a feature that you felt like is really important for us to get into Azure Data Factory. Share it with us in the chat window while we get to the last questions, right? And so the last question here that I have on the list is for Abhishek, which is allowing validation tasks with if container currently is not possible. So maybe Abhishek, Charlie, both of you can share some thoughts.
Sure. So the question around validation tasks with if container, maybe if we can expand on this particular ask with a scenario, that would really help as well to understand this problem better. So maybe just requesting, since we have time, if we can expand this on probably a scenario around that, the validation tasks within the if container, because we have heard about different kinds of validation tasks. We do have a validation activity as well. So just wanted to understand how is it related to the container and what's the end-to-end scenario. So maybe a quick description around on the chat would really help here.
Got it. So yeah, while we wait for that note to come in, maybe given that we don't have additional questions, maybe let's just go around one round. Yeah, Charlie.
I guess I'll piggyback a little bit on that question and introduce and preview a new activity that will probably release sometime this calendar year. I assume the question here is you want an intentional way to, based on the if condition, to fill a pipeline and do some more validation, right? So taking a step backward and just putting a feature that we're introducing to ADF sometime this calendar year is we're actually introducing an set error activity that intentionally will fill your pipeline. So we have seen a lot of people asking, say, hey, my third-party integration or another app responded with a success, but I know the process didn't finish, and I want to mark my pipeline as failure as such and stuff like that. So we hear you, and we're going to intentionally introduce a new activity to break your pipeline at your request. This is very different from anything we're doing so far in ADF so far, but yeah, you will have an error out activities going forward. Hope I don't know if it answered your question in your particular scenario, but I think it will help a lot of other scenarios too. Okay.
Hey, thank you, Charlie. Now, as we wait for more questions to stream in through the Q&A, and do keep the questions coming in, we have also completed answering most of the questions that everyone has pre-submitted before the AMA. So maybe for now, while we wait for questions to come in, maybe let's just do one round among like the PM and EM team here. What is everyone's top of mind for Azure Data Factory right now? Or maybe some snippet or sneak preview of some features that you could share publicly to the group here. So maybe we start from the back. We start with Sunil and then we go back to Abhishek. Yeah, Sunil, like what's your top of mind, for Azure Data Factory? Yeah.
Yeah, the top of the mind, the way we see the product evolving is, becoming, more real time and, ingesting, like terabytes, petabytes of data, becoming a cloud native ETL solution, the leader in the market. We actually, look at our competition in the market, but we believe that with upcoming features of supporting delta changes and responding to more real-time integration scenarios, we're actually working on those features. I think that would make the product much richer and more consumable for new workloads. Okay, so stay tuned, please. Yeah.
Yeah, and like this is more of an open conversation with the community. And as each of the PMs and EM shares about some of their top of mind, if you felt like, hey, this is something you felt really passionate about, you want to contact us, definitely reach out to us and we'd love to hear your thoughts. Right. So with after Sunil, maybe let's move to Mark. What is your top of mind in this calendar year, right?
Yeah, so for the rest of this calendar year, what's top of mind for us on the data transformation, Synapse, and those areas that I focus on is really making the job of the data engineer as easy as possible. And we see collectively as a team, we see Data Factory as the key data integration ETL tool within Azure. And so data engineers you're all sort of our core cohorts and the folks that we would make your life easier as much as we can with our tool, and we want you to be in ADF and using that to do your jobs. And so on the data flow side, there's a couple of things that I've already mentioned that I'm really excited about. As we bring more and more connectors in the data flow, we enable more and more transformation functions and transformations themselves. Those are all just sort of things that natively grow within the product, just as kind of an organic growth mechanism of the tool and of the product. But the things I was talking about earlier, like the flowlets, bringing more capability into Power Query for the citizen integrators, bringing more personas into ADF. Really excited about those things. And the last thing I'll leave on is, making this all on par with Synapse. And if you're in Synapse today and using pipelines and data flows, it's the same experience, but there's a few friction points there, a few things that aren't quite the same in those, and we're really working hard to burn those down, make that the same, so that if you're a data engineer who's also working on Synapse SQL pools and Synapse Spark, you can have that single pane of glass to do all that work, and that's a very big focus of ours. That's I'm really excited about as we do more of that this year.
Hey, thank you, Mark. And then we move on to Charlie before I get back to Abhishek.
Yeah. Hi, I'm Charlie. I talked about my ownership is orchestration. So I oversee a lot of these things over orchestrations, and that including trigger. There is a new trend that we're seeing that is event-driven architecture and Delta pipelines. As Sunil previously mentioned briefly, we are actively looking onto these Delta pipelines. We're actively looking into how triggers can integrate with event grid and bringing really these capabilities of event-driven architectures into ADF. We're no longer relying on the world clock. We're trying to process the data as they come in. The other top of the mind is, someone mentioned it before, the metadata-driven architecture. So you don't have to duplicate your pipeline for a bazillion different source and sync pairs. You don't have to make the choice to execute pipelines, which pipeline to execute. Predefined. We're looking into ways we can simplify your pipeline development with a lot of these metadata-driven. So just on top of our mind, as previously mentioned, IR selections, execute pipelines and which pipeline to execute, and execute data flow pipeline, which data flow pipeline to execute, and also along the ways of a few other settings to facilitate the metadata driven. So yeah, just a brief case on the orchestration side is customer facing is we're always interested into bringing new capabilities to catch the new trend in the ETL market. And but behind the scene, I'm here to focus on operational to make sure ADF is always highly available to our customers. So however large we grow, we will make sure the experience is okay and we're reliable for our customers to deliver what we promise. So yeah.
Hey, thank you, Charlie. And then I think the last top of mind is for Abhishek. And then as Abhishek, you talk about some of your top of mind, maybe you could also share with us some of your thinking behind, many times in a lot of customers' call, the top of mind had always been, can we have an email activity and so on and so forth to be able to send notification if something goes wrong. If you could talk about some of the recent exploration that you did around sending notification to Microsoft Teams channel and what is there, that would be good, right? So share your top of mind and then share the Teams notification, right?
Sure. So let's talk about, I think this is also one of the key asks from an orchestration or the ETL tool that someone should be able to notify users or a group of users when there is an event in a pipeline which needs to be notified, maybe a failure of an activity which requires an attention. Sometimes it's just a warning, sometimes it's a failure. Yes, while orchestration can handle all those things and you can choose to fail or execute, you need to notify your end users as well if there's an action that needs to be taken. And so for now, we have always had this integration with the Logic Apps where you can invoke and send email notifications through Logic Apps or through Azure Monitor when the pipeline fails or an event of a pipeline is passed to Azure Monitor. You can trigger those emails. Additionally, on top of that, what we see is most of our users in the Microsoft stack use Teams, and not just Microsoft stack, I would say. There are plenty of people using Microsoft Teams now. And so Teams is probably one of those beautiful apps which works on all devices, all form factors. And so if there is really an urgent requirement, a need to kind of reach out to your end users or data engineers for any help, Teams plays a big role in there as well. And we use Teams drastically for doing deployments, for chatting with engineers, trying to find out issues and things like that. So that's probably the collaboration team product of choice. So that's where we recently did a small blog on how you can configure Teams so that you can easily send notifications or events from your pipelines when an activity fails or succeeds, which will be easily noticed, and you can send it on mobile app because Teams will take care of sharing wherever Teams is installed for that particular user. So you can share it on Teams channel, and you can even make those actionable. So there are things like webhooks, there are things like you can invoke notifications, and you can even invoke a pipeline run through your Teams. So you can stitch it that particular way using the webhooks as well. So it's very much extensible, and that's one of the things that we recently did. And then on top of that, I would also want to talk about security changes. Like security, of course, holds a paramount importance as well in data integration, because if things go wrong, you're passing all your credentials, database credentials and stuff like that. So things needs to be really secured. So that's also one of the key focuses that we have, making sure our security is up to the mark, And so we are soon going to release something where you would be able to bring in your user assigned managed identities as well. We do support system assigned identities, but we do understand that especially when people are doing metadata driven things and they're dynamically creating factories and deleting factories, many of those ISV solutions or metadata driven solutions might not even require you to have data factory created, instantiated all the while you can do that in a serverless manner during your job creation and stuff like that. So one of the key important factors is how can you create, a pre-dependency between or for authentication purposes in Active Directory. And so the user assigned identity is another form of managed identity like system assigned, but it can be created well before your data factory creation happens. And so using that, you can enable authentication to all your link services without having to have an extra step of granting each factory's managed identity into your storage or into your database. Rather than doing that, you can have a common managed identity, let's say for a project, and use that managed identity for interacting with your databases, your data lakes, and so on. So that's something which we're going to shortly release, which will help you additionally add managed identities as well using a common place, which we'll call it as a credential object.
Hey, thank you, Abhishek. And now that everyone has shared their thoughts, given that there are no more questions coming, we thought we'll give time back. But before that, I'll hand it back to Dion to share any last minute logistics or things that we need to do for the Ask Me Anything. But, as usual, we deeply appreciate everyone's time. All the feedback that everyone gives to us, whether it is through the ADF, forums, or whether it's directly to the product group. We appreciate every single feedback that comes, and we hope to work with you, right, to grow Azure Data Factory, as well as many of the data integration experience on Azure, whether it's in Synapse or many other tools, to the next level, right? So we deeply appreciate everyone's time, and I'll hand it back to Dion. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I just put a link for the Reactor survey with today's event ID, which is 13382. If you have a few minutes and can fill that out, we greatly appreciate your feedback. Thank you so much for joining us, and we hope you can join us for another session here soon.